The story begins with the discovery of a new ghost in one of the city's districts. He could be seen from 12 to 3 a.m., throwing a basketball from side to side while dancing. According to the study, the ghost's abilities are primarily related to the sound of his basketball shot. So far, 13 people have been killed, and authorities have dubbed the ghost the basketball phantom. Meanwhile, schools have urged students to be extremely careful at night. However, not all the children listened to the teacher attentively enough. So she broke off a piece of chalk and threw it straight at the student who had fallen asleep on his desk. The chalk hit the white-haired boy, Ethan, right in the forehead, and he cried out in unexpected pain. The teacher asked him again the question he had slept through the first time. What would he do if he suddenly met a ghost at night? But the guy didn't understand anything. He had just been lying in his bed and watching horror films. Had he really been reborn? However, the teacher rushed him to answer, and the boy replied that the night ghosts themselves were not capable of causing harm to others. They mainly affected the human psyche through words, causing the person to become delirious and go off into the deep forest to be eaten by other ghosts, so one simply had to pass by the night ghosts. Then the teacher stopped him and said that a student in the neighboring class was killed by a night ghost some time ago, so all the students should be careful. At that moment, Ethan felt the original owner's memories of this world flood into his brain, and he realized that he was in a parallel world. The only difference from his past life was that this world was full of spirits. Demons and monsters were running amok, and everyone here was able to awaken their own spiritual weapon, become a spirit master, face ghosts, and even kill them. At that moment, the bell rang, and someone grabbed Ethan by the shoulder, saying that an instructor would soon arrive from the palace to personally test their spiritual weapons. It was Liam, a chubby kid with dark hair. He kept talking about how he was going to become a high-ranking spirit master, but Ethan doubted he could do it. Meanwhile, a gray-haired man in a black coat was approaching the office, and everyone on his way bowed respectfully to him. It was Albert, a third-level spirit master from Tenchi Palace, who was in charge of testing spiritual weapons. Ethan was surprised at how strong the man's aura was. Ethan said that people are born with spiritual weapons, they can be controlled with spiritual power, and then he showed a small, shiny ball, a spiritual stone obtained from a ghost. It contains a lot of energy and can help stimulate spiritual weapons. The students were called one by one so that they could test the effect of the stone on themselves. The fair-haired boy squeezed the stone in his hand, and a bright blue aura swirled around it. Everyone was surprised, and something round and flattened flew out of his chest. But a moment later, everyone realized that it was an ordinary roadside stone, and the whole class burst into laughter. However, Albert rebuked them, saying that the boy's weapon was of a high level, and it even had 7 skill slots. He extended his hand, and a bright aura shone between his fingers. And then the man added that the type of spiritual weapon was not that important, and it was the holes on the weapon that were the most important factor. It's just like in the game League of Gods and Ghosts. A character with 7 skills has an absolute advantage over a character with 3 skills, because the more holes a spiritual weapon has, the more soul pearls it can absorb. The man demonstrated various types of weapons, while Ethan openly fell asleep. And then the next one to be called was Oliver, the guy who had become a real thorn in Ethan's side ever since he stopped him from hitting on a classmate. And now he had awakened a good spiritual weapon, which was undoubtedly bad for Ethan himself. Oliver walked up to the board, showing off his weapon to everyone with undisguised pride. However, Liam was unhappy with this. He thought that it was absolutely unfair, but Ethan was confident that he could easily handle his weapon. And as if by fate, Ethan was challenged to a duel with Oliver. The guy was sure that even with 3 skill holes, he would trample this upstart into the dirt. He took the spiritual stone in his hands, expecting a weapon that would be reflected in his soul, in the soul of the reincarnated. Soon a blade burst out of his chest. It had perfect proportions, sharp blades. However, it was a normal weapon with 3 holes, and the whole class burst into laughter because it was the worst weapon among all the students here. Oliver was the happiest of all because he had a great opportunity to bring this arrogant boy down to earth. Amid the laughter of his classmates, Ethan sat down at his desk and then saw that some strange aura was oozing out of his weapon in black drops. It started to fly all over the class, but the others didn't seem to notice. And then a message appeared in front of Ethan, asking him to lower his head and look at his shadow. Looking down, the boy saw that his shadow seemed to have turned into a black liquid that was spreading across the floor. And then he realized His shadow was being controlled by something. The message appeared before Ethan again, telling him that his shadow could devour ghosts and gain their powers. The creature seemed to read Ethan's thoughts. It knew that he doubted the reality of what was happening and would definitely want to find evidence later. The guy was shocked. Could his shadow really do this? After all, if that were the case, then any ability of the ghost could become his, and the number of skill slots would no longer limit him. He will be able to hunt strong ghosts, recover quickly, and then he will become the Lord of Spirits. Meanwhile, a meeting of students from the third group was taking place on the sports ground. Albert stood on the stage congratulating the boys on the awakening of their spiritual weapons, and then asked them a question. What exactly do people rely on in the fight against ghosts? Oliver immediately shouted out the answer, spiritual weapon, and the other students supported him. However, the answer was wrong. Albert meant courage, and Oliver was quite annoyed at being corrected in front of such a large crowd. Albert continued. He talked about how the power of ghosts lies in the fact that they are dead, and people have long been afraid of everything otherworldly. He added that he had seen many talented spirit masters with 10 or more skills, but when they actually encountered a spirit, they were scared to death and couldn't even pick up a weapon. However, one of the students standing in front of Ethan was not fazed by this and whispered that she would still become a high-ranking spirit master. The man said that the test that the young masters will have to pass includes not only the awakening of weapons, but also a practical part. After all, if they truly want to become spirit masters, they must muster up the courage to face the spirit in person, even though it is dangerous and some of the students may get hurt. The boys panicked. They hadn't expected the test to be so dangerous, but Ethan didn't give up. He believed that the most the spirits would do was scare them a little, especially since they would be under the supervision of the Tenchi Palace Master. Moreover, the young man understood that if he could not pass even this test, then he would definitely not be able to become a powerful spirit lord. Albert said that those who wanted to leave could do so now, and many of the students immediately walked towards the exit, muttering under their breath that they did not want to deal with spirits. But Ethan remained standing, surprising many of his classmates, and Liam and Oliver also remained on the field with him. Albert chuckled contentedly, because out of 300 people, only 100 remained, and the boy didn't even bat an eyelid. After this, the man turned around and said that the remaining boys could go to the school gates. Oliver sauntered over to Ethan, not believing he was actually staying, but the blue-haired youth answered him that Oliver would definitely be able to pass the test, because he was so ugly that the ghosts themselves would run away from him in horror. Ethan and his friend then headed toward the school gates, leaving their angry classmate behind. Meanwhile, 100 of the most outcast spirit lords had already gathered at the gate. They were supposed to go to a place where only wandering ghosts lived, and Albert assured them that they could come out of there safe and sound even without spiritual weapons, as long as they kept their resolve in their hearts. He also said that there are 3 danger levels: white, green, and red, and night ghosts are at best of white danger level, while strong red-level ghosts can run amok inside cities. Some high-ranking ghosts can even cover the sky and destroy a city. According to the rules of the challenge, whoever kills the most ghosts will receive the green ghost pearl. The students immediately perked up because this pearl was worth a fortune, and now it was so close to them. However, one of the students, Vivian, a dark-haired girl in a pink sundress, was determined to win. She was sure that the green-level soul pearl would be hers, because she had already awakened an artifact with 9 skill holes. But Ethan wasn't going to give up just like that either. He had the same goal, to get the pearl. After some time, the students arrived in the northern outskirts of the city, where a test awaited them. Meanwhile, Oliver and a few other guys decided to team up with Vivian, and she didn't mind, as long as they didn't interfere with her. Liam was scared and wanted to work with Ethan, but Ethan decided that it would be better for them to work alone. Ethan knew it was best for him not to tell anyone about the Shadow's existence. Meanwhile, Albert gave each student a jade bottle, into which the ghost pearl should be poured after he was defeated, and based on the filling of the bottle, the winner would be chosen. With these words, the man announced the beginning of the test. And since Ethan decided to act alone, without delay, he went deeper into the forest first. Albert watched him go, thinking that the boy had a brave heart and could be very useful, but his qualifications left much to be desired. Following Ethan, Vivian's team set out, led by the girl herself. The guy himself was already wandering through the trees. Wandering ghosts were flying past him every now and then. Everything was quite calm, But then one of the ghosts from behind the trees seemed to call him by name. Ethan immediately turned around, clutching his dagger. Had he really run into a ghost that quickly? However, the ghost was faster than the boy, and in an instant was behind him. It was a gray-haired dead man in torn clothes. He looked at Ethan with empty eye sockets. The creature placed a long, bony hand on the boy's shoulder, and he froze in horror. Ethan turned around to see the terrifying face of a spirit. Only one of its sockets had an eyeball in it. It was looking at the guy, an ominous aura swirling around it. However, Ethan cut the spirit's body with one movement of his blade, and it disappeared screaming. All that remained of the horrific creature was a bright blue sphere, a ghostly aura still swirling around it. It was a pearl. It flew into Ethan's bottle, and the guy meanwhile noted that his dagger was very convenient. It was a pity that it had so few holes for skills. When the young man turned around, a ghostly aura was swirling around him again. Soon spirits emerged from it, muttering something about themselves, gradually surrounding Ethan. A black aura flowed out of the spirits' eyes and mouths like tentacles. It began to spread across the field, and soon reached the young man's feet. In a moment, his limbs were already caught in black vines. They wrapped around him tighter and tighter. However, with one deft movement of the dagger, he cut the threads of the black aura, freeing himself from it. A moment later, he rushed toward the spirits, slashing at them with his weapon, cutting them in half and chopping off their heads. Soon it was all over, and an out-of-breath Ethan sat down to rest near a tree, looking with relief at his jade bottle. It was almost a third full, but he understood that he couldn't relax because he was alone, and Vivian was working with a team, and if they concentrated all their resources on themselves, then Ethan would definitely not be able to catch up with them. Just as he was starting to think about what to do next, his shadow began to move again, turning into a viscous liquid rising upward. Then the message appeared before him again. It said that destroying the wandering ghost would not be enough, and that Ethan should go deeper into the forest, destroy the white ghosts, as well as the misty ghosts lurking in the cemetery. Ethan was taken aback because he had no intention of going so deep. He couldn't understand whether the shadow had a mind of its own, because it seemed to him that it was simply leading him by the nose. The guy decided that he should go back, since white-level ghosts can seriously harm a person. Only first-level spirit masters should deal with them, and he didn't want to die yet. He started walking back to the bus when the shadow sent him another message, telling him that it knew about his suspicions and mistrust. But if he turned around now, there was no way he would get the green-level soul pearl. Resigned to the fact that the shadow would not leave him alone, Ethan asked how he was supposed to defeat the white misty ghost. The creature replied that this time it would need the help of the shadow beneath it. At that moment, the aura swirled and began to form into something. It was a person. The creature smiled ominously and said that Ethan needed to go north, where he would find a white misty ghost in the cemetery. At this point, the shadow disappeared. Was that really all his hint? Ethan knew that once the test was over, he would have to figure out what kind of creature it was. But for now, he needed to focus on getting the pearl. Soon the guy came to the cemetery and he immediately realized that some strange aura reigned everywhere here. It was getting foggier all around. And then Ethan remembered that a large concentration of wandering ghosts with strong feelings of resentment and hatred, often inhabiting cemeteries, have the ability to summon large numbers of spirits and hide their true bodies in a white fog that impairs visibility and kills people. Apparently, it was the foggy ghost method. Meanwhile, the test for Vivian's team was in full swing. She easily cut demons in half with her spiritual weapon. All that was left for the girls' partners was to collect the pearls after destroying the ghosts. Vivian realized that wandering ghosts were also divided into weak and strong, and she had to spend too much spiritual energy. The boys admired their classmates' fighting skills, as she had just defeated a wandering white-level ghost. But Vivian herself was already very tired. She needed to regain her strength, so she sat down near the nearest tree, intending to rest a little. And even though her team wanted to continue filling the jade bottle without rest, the girl was adamant. She intended to regain her strength and then overtake everyone with a huge advantage, because only then would the Tenshi Palace be able to recognize her talent. Meanwhile, Oliver's team was trapped, surrounded by thorny vines. The boys realized that this was the very lair of wandering ghosts, and they urgently needed to leave here. After some time, when the team had run a sufficient distance from the forest, the guys decided to take a rest. Suddenly, there was a sound behind Oliver. Someone was rustling in the bushes. It turned out it was Liam, apparently lost. He wasn't on Ethan's team and was just wandering around the woods alone until he came across Oliver's team. But the guys didn't want to deal with him because he was a lower-class person to them. The boys turned around and left, saying that if Liam got into trouble, he should blame his friend who abandoned him. The young man was depressed because the forest was teeming with wandering ghosts, and he had no one to rely on because his friend was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, Ethan was fighting a misty ghost that turned out to be much stronger than the creatures the boy had encountered earlier. The spirit grabbed Ethan by the neck and held him in the air, making hissing sounds. A thick fog came out of his mouth and penetrated straight into the boy. The creature injected yin energy into Ethan's body, sucking out his life force. But the boy understood that he didn't want to die here at all. Suddenly, Ethan's shadow began to move again. It formed into a hand. Many shadow tentacles appeared around it, and they reached out to the ghost. They began to entangle the creature from all sides, not even allowing it to understand what was happening. A shadow hand grabbed the ghost's face, and tentacles wrapped around his body and arms, forcing him to loosen his grip and release the boy. Ethan was free, but he knew that the shadow had overcome the ghost, and now he would turn into white mist and run away, and he couldn't let that happen. Just as the ghost was about to turn into a misty aura, Ethan leaped upward, piercing it with his dagger. When he landed, he was in shock. He didn't know the shadow was capable of such a thing, and yet it saved his life. And just as the boy was about to take the pearl into his bottle, he realized that his shadow had once again become ordinary, lifeless, and the creature had left without leaving him the long-awaited trophy. However, suddenly the shadow beneath his feet began to form a word. Right. The guy examined his right hand and froze. It looked like it had been burnt, all covered in scars. But suddenly she seemed to start producing an aura. It was the same fog that the ghost had that they had just defeated with the shadow. The boy waved his hand, and the fog swirled into a whirlwind. And then he realized that not only was he not harmed by the encounter with such a powerful spirit, but he could now control the fog. He had gained the power of a white foggy ghost. Spirit lords could only use ghost abilities through the soul pearls embedded in their spirit weapons, but Ethan could use them directly without a weapon or a pearl. The guy was sure that it was all thanks to the shadow. His right arm could be returned to its original form when the skill disappeared, but the changes were still a little scary, so he should wear long sleeves just in case. Now Ethan could hide his presence and use the unpredictability factor, and it was simply the perfect skill for his spiritual weapon. He realized that now it was his turn to hunt. An hour later, Ethan's bottle was almost full. The ability of the white misty ghost really did increase the effectiveness of kills, and he became curious about what other skill the Green Soul Pearl could give. After all, Ethan was looking forward to the time when he could become stronger. Meanwhile, dawn had broken, and the boys began to slowly gather in the clearing where the test had begun. And Liam was the happiest of all that it was over. Soon Oliver and his company appeared in the clearing. He was clearly glad that Ethan was still not there. The guy walked up to Albert and gave him his bottle. It was 80% full, which turned out to be a pretty good result. Following Oliver, Vivian and her team came out into the clearing, walking with great confidence as befits the daughter of the spirit guardians. She also handed Albert her bottle, and he was amazed because this was one of the best results of the day. Vivian decided that victory was already in her pocket and asked to be given the Green Soul Pearl. But at that moment, Ethan appeared in the clearing, walking leisurely towards the other students, saying that it would be unfair to announce the winner without waiting for his return. Vivian was sure it was a waste of time since no one could surpass her, but Ethan still approached Albert and gave him his bottle. The man himself did not expect anything special from the boy, but when he opened his bottle, he was stunned. It was simply overflowing with pearls. All the students were shocked. How was it possible that a guy with only 3 skill holes could achieve this? Albert had no choice but to rightly declare Ethan the winner. He kept his promise and gave him the reward, the Green Soul Pearl. Vivian was extremely unhappy with this development of events because she was sure that the pearl would go to her, and now Ethan became her main rival. Albert wondered how a guy with such qualifications could win, but nevertheless he told him that in the Tenshi Palace there was also a master with only 3 spiritual weapon holes, and yet he was very strong. But before Ethan could ask him more about this man, the man declared the test over and sent all the students home, watching them go and thinking to himself that Ethan's case was 1 in a million, still not believing that such a thing could happen twice. After some time, Ethan had already returned to the city. It was already late evening, however. This place in the city was always very crowded, but now there was not a soul here. Suddenly, someone appeared behind the guy and asked him something, which made Ethan jump in fear. It was an elderly man. He asked if Ethan knew where the furniture store was. His son works there as a manager, but he didn't come home today and doesn't answer the phone. But the boy understood that this furniture store had been closed for a long time, so he suggested that the old man return home and wait for news from his son for a while longer. And at that moment he noticed that the old man did not cast a shadow. It was a ghost. Ethan turned around in an instant, saying that he would bring his son here, and ran away, not wanting to be in the company of a ghost any longer. Finally, the young man ran to the house and immediately slammed the door, because he knew that the furniture store had caught fire and all the staff had burned alive. And since then, no one had worked there. And that old man, apparently, was a night ghost. He had difficulty distinguishing between the night ghosts and the people inside the city, and he knew he needed to train more. Ethan walked inside the house, and a dark-haired girl appeared in front of him, dressed only in a long white shirt. It was the biological daughter of the adoptive parents of the previous owner of the body, Gwen. She didn't understand why her brother looked so surprised. Maybe it was because of that instructor from Tenchi Palace. But Ethan said it wasn't him, because he, like Gwen, had awakened his spiritual weapon. And then the girl asked how many skill holes he had received. Upon learning that her brother's spirit weapon only had 3 holes, Gwen was very surprised and advised him to do something else, deciding that working with spirits was not his thing. The girl's weapon itself had 12 skill slots, so many that she could share them with Ethan. The guy couldn't believe she was so gifted. But with these words, Gwen went to her room, saying that she was going to bed, and that Ethan should also go to bed early. The guy went to his room and began to think that even though he had the pearl, using it was a real headache. However, he needs to absorb her first to understand what skills she can give him. Suddenly, the shadow wrote a message to Ethan again, saying that he now wanted to let the shadow consume the pearl. But this time, Ethan didn't intend to give up all the shadows. Instead, he wanted to insert the pearl into his spiritual weapon, which he did. As soon as the pearl was inserted into the hole, the young man's dagger and he himself seemed to be pierced by lightning. In a moment, he seemed to be in space, hovering above the planet alone with his weapon. The dagger was blazing with turquoise flames. He had obtained a green-level soul pearl skill, a flash of green light. Ethan knew that this was a powerful enough skill, capable of causing serious damage to white-level ghosts. Suddenly, the pearl seemed to release waves of its energy in 3 more directions. The guy was shocked. Could it be that an expanded branch of the soul pearl had appeared in his spiritual weapon? The green pearl formed 3 more, bronze, black, and the pearl of the white misty ghost. The bronze one gave power and range. The black one allowed one to silence the enemy for 3 seconds, and the white one halved the buffer time and spiritual power required for this ability, and also doubled the speed of their release. Ethan understood that each of the abilities was very useful, and they were even comparable to the skills of red-tier soul pearls. It is extremely difficult to obtain a red-tier pearl, and the success rate of absorption is only 50%. But Ethan's spiritual weapon can produce mutations at the red-tier level so easily. Looking up, the boy saw that the branches of the pearl were spreading in different directions. It turned out that each skill could generate even more branches, and he would be able to create an incomparably huge skill tree. And if it really does develop this way, then it is possible that a flash of green light will tear the heavens apart in the future. However, Ethan later returned to his world and went to school the next day. Vivian entered the office looking for Ethan. She wanted the green pearl and was willing to pay $30,000 for it. However, Ethan was smart enough not to agree to such a deal, and instead of the pearl, he offered the girl to buy a fried donut from him. However, Vivian did not want to give up. She needed this pearl. Oliver slammed his foot on the table and sat down opposite Ethan, deciding to support the girl, saying that she would need this thing much more than some good-for-nothing. Oliver was angry. He did not understand why this upstart suddenly became so arrogant, because he still would not be accepted into the Tenchi Palace with his 3 holes on the weapon. But Ethan decided to end this pointless argument and said that there was nothing left to buy, since he had already swallowed this pearl a long time ago. Vivian turned to leave, advising the guy not to get cocky and saying that they still had a long way to go. Meanwhile, the teacher entered the classroom. She was ready to announce the list of those who had been accepted into the Tenchi Palace. She began to read out the list, and Oliver was among the lucky ones. But Ethan's name was not mentioned, and Oliver was already about to laugh at his enemy. But then the teacher said that the letter had a note for a student with a special pass, and his name was Ethan. The whole class couldn't believe that this was possible, but Oliver was the most annoyed of all. He couldn't understand how this idiot with 3 holes could get into the palace, and even with a special invitation. However, the teacher quickly put him in his place, saying that there was no reason to doubt the Tenchi Palace's decision. Everyone whose name was called had to go home and pack their things, as the spiritual master would pick them up in the afternoon. Ethan walked proudly past the desks, collecting surprised and even angry glances from his classmates. Arriving home, he was about to say goodbye to his sister and tell her that she could call him anytime, when clothes flew into his face. Ethan was surprised that his sister was collecting so many things for him, but the girl told him not to flatter himself, because these clothes were not for him at all. She happily handed her brother a shiny badge, the kind only special students get, which meant that she was also going to the palace. Ethan was puzzled as to where she got this badge from, and Gwen herself understood that it was all because of their parents. They were once members of the Dawn Group and sacrificed themselves to save people when they sealed a large ghost. Realizing that Gwen knew much more than him, Ethan decided to ask her what this whole organization was. The girl replied that it was a group of the best spiritual masters. Different spirit masters had different skill areas and directions of development, and usually each of them specialized in a certain aspect. Moreover, when combined, they produce an unexpected chemical effect. The Spirit Masters organization is a group of people with various talents. Gwen herself positioned herself as a master of long-range combat, and in the future she will develop in this direction. Ethan thought they should find some good teammates, but his sister just smirked, because no team would want to accept someone with only 3 skill holes. But Ethan understood that his abilities with unlimited potential made him equal to the entire team. When the time came, all the chosen students arrived at their destination, where a bus was already waiting for them. Gwen stood near the bus stop, waiting for her brother, and all the other students looked at her with undisguised admiration. But this did not last long, since Ethan hastened to bring the most admiring ones down to earth, because his sister was clearly not at their level. Soon everyone had loaded their luggage onto the bus, and it set off. No one had been told how long the ride would be, and it was getting rather boring just sitting in one place, when a blonde girl who had been sitting behind them poked her head between Ethan and Gwen's seats, wanting to meet her future classmates. Ethan liked the girl immediately. He was glad to meet her. Sally, her parents are members of the Blue Knight group. The guy said that he had heard a lot about them and simply admired her father, but Gwen understood that he just wanted to butter up his new acquaintance. The boys continued to get to know each other and promised to exchange numbers if they were suddenly assigned to different classes. Gwen quickly ended this performance by saying that her brother really didn't know anything about spirit lords. But in the meantime, something strange was happening. The tunnel the students were traveling through seemed to never end, and the phones lost signal. Ethan went to the driver to find out what was going on, but he didn't understand anything either. He had driven through it many times, but now the tunnel seemed endless. Nothing could be seen ahead. There were other cars driving in front of the bus, but now they seemed to have disappeared. Panic was growing among the students in the cabin, and the temperature inside was somehow getting lower and lower. Something was wrong. Ethan asked the driver to stop the car, and the passengers decided to prepare their spiritual weapons, deciding that ghosts were involved. And then the car finally stopped. Gwen took out her weapon, a fan, and warned everyone to be careful. Ethan knew that this was definitely the work of a ghost, and while everyone else on the bus was worried and trying to calm themselves with the thought that they, the children of powerful spiritual masters, could not possibly have been ambushed, Ethan's shadow became active again. Her next message stated that the dark tunnel was full of unknown horrors, and it was at this moment that Ethan decided to leave the car. The guy understood that the shadow had decided to let him out for a reason, so he decided to follow its message and go outside, which the other passengers were very unhappy about. Because what if some evil spirit got in through the open door? Ethan said he just decided to go to the bathroom, but Gwen realized it wasn't that simple and decided to go with her brother. She still didn't understand what was happening, and her brother told her that some paranormal phenomenon must have happened on the way. Apparently, Tenchi's palace was involved in this. Ethan believed that if they truly wanted to become spirit masters, they couldn't just sit and wait for death. They had to explore this mysterious tunnel. It was pitch dark here, So the boys decided to use flashlights, and Ethan dared to suggest that someone must be secretly watching them from Tenchi's palace. At that moment, something fell from above right into his hand. It was paper money. Soon the entire road was covered with paper coins. The guys on the bus started to panic more and more, because Ethan and his sister said that they went to the toilet, but the light from their phones kept getting further and further away. As it turned out, Ethan was right, and someone really was watching the students. Two men, watching them closely through a huge monitor. The middle-aged man with scars running across his face was clearly unhappy that the future spirit lords were simply hiding in the car and waiting to be rescued. His companion, a grown man with a bushy mustache, advised him not to be so critical, as they were only children, and then he turned his attention to the boy and girl, the first to get off the bus. The men realized that these were William's children, number 2 of the Dawn group. The man with the mustache explained to his partner that his adopted son, Ethan, only had 3 skill holes, but his biological daughter, Gwen, had 12. Hearing this, the scarred man decided to test the teenagers and ordered one white Fulgi ghost to be sent into the tunnel. He wanted to see Gwen in action, and his partner was quite surprised by such hasty measures. But the man merely waved goodbye and declared that he had everything under control. Meanwhile, it was getting colder in the tunnel. A moment later, the boys were enveloped in clouds of fog, which kept getting thicker and thicker. Ethan realized that this meant that the white misty ghost was nearby, so he stepped forward, leaving his sister behind, because he knew that the creature usually attacked from behind, and that way they would have a better chance of noticing it. He also understood that he could only use the green flash once, and then it would be unavailable for a full minute, so he couldn't miss. But he believed that with green-level skills, he would be able to defeat the ghost. There were frightening sounds in the distance. They were getting closer and closer, and Ethan knew it was a ghost. It was getting colder, but the guy had not yet seen the ghost. But when it turned around, he was frozen with horror. A terrifying creature loomed over his sister, its eyes looking like they were sewn together and thick smoke billowing from its mouth. The gusts of wind were so strong that they literally grabbed Gwen and carried her straight towards the ghost. And then Ethan realized that his target was the girl. But he was not going to give his sister into the clutches of this monster. In one movement, he jumped up, drawing his dagger on the fly. The boy swung his weapon, using his skill, a flash of green light. This technique caused the ghost to howl in pain and evaporate. Soon Gwen was also freed from the clutches of the thick fog. She ran up and grabbed her brother. She didn't understand why the fog kept thickening, but Ethan assured her that the fog ghost wouldn't harm them. Meanwhile, the scarred man watched everything through the monitors. He also didn't understand where all that smoke was coming from, since one ghost wasn't capable of that. He understood that the bus contained the descendants of great people, so the safest option for him was to go and check for himself what had happened there. The white fog continued to thicken around the teenagers, but Ethan assured his sister that he would deal with it and left the girl behind in a safe place. The young man swung his dagger, searching for the spirit, for the mist expanded his range of perception, and once it touched the creature, it would no longer be able to escape. And when the ghost finally caught up with him, Ethan flew up to him in one movement and struck him with his weapon right in the back. However, the blows felt like the guy was hitting metal. It seemed like the only way to somehow hurt this creature was to use the skill, but was it worth wasting time waiting for it to recharge? Ethan didn't want to wait that long, and then another option occurred to him. Hiding in the fog, he attacked the spirit from behind, right in the deep wound that the flash of green light had left on him. He only needed one successful attack, and he succeeded, destroying the creature in one move. He left behind a soul pearl, and although it took Ethan much more energy to deal with the white-level ghost, he still killed it himself. He knew he could use the soul pearl to break through the advanced green light bursts again, as a minute-long recharge was too long for the ever-changing battlefield. Gwen, meanwhile, emerged from the fog and found her brother, glad that he was unharmed, but the peace did not last long. Ethan realized there was something in the fog, and it seemed pretty strong. The same scarred man emerged from the fog and introduced himself as Marcus from Tenchi Palace. Ethan quietly slipped the soul pearl into Gwen's hand. Then he smiled as if nothing had happened and said that his genius sister was able to calmly defeat the white misty ghost. Marcus was pleased with this result and told the guys to go back to the bus. Looking after them, he thought that this boy was very lucky to have such a talented sister. After some time, all the students reached the end of the tunnel, where Marcus was waiting for them. He was extremely dissatisfied with the way the students reacted to the supernatural event and stated that people could not trust their lives to such cowards. A short-haired man pretending to be one of the students also shamed them, saying he had been with them on the bus the whole time and had seen their reactions. But when Marcus saw Ethan and Gwen, he seemed to blossom, saying that he was very glad that they were so brave, especially Gwen, who at such a young age was able to destroy a white-level ghost. After that, everyone returned to the bus. Ethan was glad that it was all over, but his sister looked unhappy. She didn't understand why her brother had put on this whole show and given her the Pearl of the Soul, but he only replied that he had done it because he loved her. But Gwen was adamant. She held out the pearl and placed it back in her brother's hand, for it was unfair to take his merits for herself. Ethan understood that even if people found out the truth, the most they would do would be to simply praise him. But for Gwen, such an achievement would be useful when assigning classes in the palace. But realizing that the pearl would still remain with him, he squeezed it in his palm, deciding to see what skill it would reveal. As soon as he focused on her, she began to shine with a bright light in his hands. A moment later, he found himself back in the space he had been in before, and he realized that the flash of green light had taken a step forward thanks to that pearl. And then Ethan saw that the pearl was again splitting into 3 more directions. He couldn't believe it. Was she branching out into additional skills again? And so it was. The green pearl of the afterlife ghost allowed free control of the movement of the green flash, tripling its speed. The black pearl of the water ghost soul added marks to the attack, and the more marks there were, the higher the damage from the explosion after using the flash. The white pearl of the hang ghost allowed the creation of 3 cursed flashes. Thus, no matter which path Ethan took, the flash of green light could develop into a skill no less powerful than a red tier soul pearl. However, water ghosts were very rare and appeared only in places where there were many rivers, and hanged ghosts had a red level and were incredibly difficult to find. But then Ethan was brought out of his thoughts by his sister. All the other students were looking out the windows in fascination because they had already arrived at their destination. It was the city of Skynet, an incredibly beautiful and picturesque place. Soon the students were dropped off and asked to gather at the central square. As it turned out, the Tenchi Palace branch was located deep in the mountains. Besides Ethan himself, there were about 500 other people here, many of them representatives of the elite. Oliver and Vivian were there too. They looked at the guy with displeasure, but it didn't last long. Several people came out to the main square. They were teachers. All eyes were on Gwen, as she had killed the white misty ghost before arriving at the palace and was undoubtedly a first-class seedling of this stream. The girl felt awkward from such attention, but her brother hastened to assure her that they simply wanted to get to know her better, since she was a specially selected student. He patted his little sister on the head, deciding to continue to stick to the version that it was Gwen who killed the ghost, and promised that next time he would definitely protect her. Meanwhile, Marcus was watching them and was very worried that the boy continued to hide behind his sister's skirt, and so he decided that they needed to be assigned to different classes. His partner noticed that the man couldn't take his eyes off the girl and decided to tell him that he also had his eye on her for his class, to which Marcus immediately pounced on him, challenging him to a duel. A woman with short purple hair and a turquoise suit with a deep neckline intervened in the conversation and shamed Marcus. But Marcus was serious. He had his eye on Gwen even before she entered Skynet, to which the woman replied that she had chosen her much earlier than the man. A serious scandal broke out between them, and they even drew their weapons, intending to decide in battle who was right. However, they were stopped by the sound of a cane hitting the ground. It was an old gray-haired man, and he demanded that these games be stopped. The quarrel immediately stopped. The man and woman were terrified by the very sight of that man. The old man walked up to Gwen and her brother and stared at Ethan. Did he really realize that he was different from ordinary people? The man said that the girl should choose her own path in her future class. The purple-haired woman immediately ran up to Gwen, introducing herself as Emma, the head of Class A, and promising to make the girl a legendary spirit master of at least level 5. Arthur, the plump man with the mustache, the head of Class B, came up from behind, noticing what excellent noodles Emma was hanging on the girl's ears, and said that if Gwen joined his class, he would give her 3 green-level soul pearls and also make her a level 3 overlord. The other teachers also began to run up to the girl one by one, each trying to offer her something more. But Marcus was determined to get Gwen into his class, so he offered her one Hang Ghost Soul Pearl if she would join him. Emma and Arthur realized that the man was going crazy because he was ready to give away the pearl, which ranked 7th among the red-level soul pearls, and for Marcus himself, it was the best opportunity to finally rise above level 3. Ethan knew that this pearl gave the shackle skill. After the release of the spiritual master, a field would be created, and the gravity on the enemy inside it would be increased several times. Moreover, the third branch of the green light flash can create a new skill. 3 cursed flashes, but for this it requires the soul pearl of the Hang Ghost. And although it was important for Ethan, he could not interfere with his sister's decision. But apparently the sister herself needed advice, since she could not decide. But her brother insistently asked her to decide for herself. Gwen turned to Marcus, asking him to answer one question. She wondered if her brother, Ethan, would be able to study with her if she joined his class. Marcus clearly didn't like this proposal because the boy only had 3 skill holes, and he, on the contrary, wanted to send him away. Gwen then turned to Emma, who was happy to accept her, it seemed, under any conditions. Marcus really didn't want to deal with her worthless brother, but he still agreed. Getting Gwen into his class was the most important thing to him. Ethan, like his sister, was very happy that everything turned out so well, but Marcus was very angry. He wanted to do something to pay tribute to this boy. Soon all the students gathered on the training ground. Their first lesson was beginning. Marcus stood in front of them. He himself had been in these guys' place before. He remembered how scared he was when he first saw the ghost. He said that if they wanted to become spirit masters, first of all, they had to cast aside their fear, like their classmate Gwen. And as soon as the girl mentioned that her brother had helped her defeat the ghost, Marcus became angry again. He needed to make Gwen understand that her brother was no match for her. However, he continued the lesson, explaining that the power of a spirit master comes from the soul pearl, and the same skill would have a huge gap in the hands of different masters. And to demonstrate this, he chose a student, Ethan. He asked what skill was revealed to him after absorbing the green pearl, and the guy answered that it was a flash of green light. Marcus had this skill too, and he intended to show this brat the difference between them. He said that a level 1 spirit lord needs at least a minute to release the skill, but Marcus himself is at level 3, so it takes him 30 seconds. But Ethan interrupted him, saying that he also only needed 30 seconds. Marcus didn't understand how this was possible, since the boy didn't even have a level, and yet he wasn't going to acknowledge his abilities. Deciding not to show off their differences in skill, the man suggested that the students practice in person, and to do this, they had to split into pairs. The boys began to practice close combat, since for them it was the most effective way to defend themselves. Marcus asked Gwen to demonstrate useful skills to others, and the girl did an excellent job. Everyone looked at her with admiration, both the students and Marcus himself. However, seeing Ethan hanging around his sister again, he decided to pair him with Derek so they could practice what they had just learned. Derek was twice as tall and strong as Ethan, but Marcus explained his choice of opponent by saying that none of the students were immune to real combat, and if they were weak, they would be unworthy of their place in the palace. But Ethan wasn't scared, because he knew what he was capable of, and it wasn't he, but Derek, who needed to be afraid. Marcus assured that if something happened to the boy, they would be able to patch him up. A shadow message appeared before Ethan again, recommending that he show his opponent his true strength, because after absorbing the white misty ghost, the boy gained the ability to disperse. The fight began, and Derek immediately flew at his opponent, and if his blow managed to hit vital organs, then Ethan would lose the ability to move. And then the guy realized that he had no choice but to use dispersion. In an instant, Ethan found himself behind his opponent and swung his flaming fist towards him. Targets began to flash before his eyes: his head, his back, his joints, all of Derek's weak points. Suddenly, Ethan's eyes glowed red. His aura took on the appearance of a terrible monster, and he knew he had to kill it with one blow. Horrifying voices began to play in the young man's head. They said that the desire to kill was in Ethan's blood, and he could not escape it. He had to kill Derek. Each time the voice became louder, it kept repeating, "Kill, kill, kill." After all, he was born with the desire to kill. But Ethan wasn't about to give in to the voice. He swung towards his opponent using a twisting fist of wind. The next moment he struck, but the fist barely touched Derek's face, leaving only a small abrasion on it. The shock wave hit the wall of the training hall, leaving a huge smoking dent, and the students crowded around Ethan. Nobody understood how this guy could do such a thing, because he only had 3 skill holes. But Ethan knew that he had just had a real desire to completely destroy his opponent, and he was not at all happy about it. He was pulled out of his thoughts by Gwen, who ran to her brother to make sure he was not injured. She took his hand and turned to Marcus to let him appreciate his brother's strength. But the man didn't know what to answer, because Ethan only had 3 skill holes. Why was his strength so great? Not waiting for a satisfactory answer, Gwen firmly said that her brother did not need their approval at all. Turning around, Gwen and Ethan walked away from the site, attracting everyone's surprised glances. One of the students, Valerie, a student of Class E and the owner of 9 skill holes, smelled a familiar scent, and there was no doubt that it was the one she was thinking of. When evening came, Ethan and his sister reached the residential complex where the palace students rented apartments. But there was a problem. There were no rooms left. The complex manager had no choice but to go to the suburbs and try to find housing there. At that moment, an unfamiliar dark-haired girl in a white dress approached the guys from behind and said that she could sublet the apartment to them at a low price. The girl said that she was a student herself and lived in apartment 1701. She had paid for it for 3 years in advance, but now she was forced to leave, and the apartment remained empty. The manager glanced unkindly at the teenagers, since the tenant in apartment 1701 constantly changed. Soon, the mysterious girl took the boys to the apartment and opened the doors for them. The room was large and very clean. But Ethan was alarmed by the fact that the furniture was spotless, as if no one had ever used it. And the guy was about to give up this apartment and find something less suspicious, when the girl said that she was ready to give them a 50% discount. Ethan couldn't refuse such an offer and signed the contract anyway, after which the girl gave them the keys and said that they should not contact her anymore. Having wished the boys a happy stay, she left the apartment. Gwen was alarmed by this behavior, but Ethan, not wanting to worry his sister, hastened to assure her that everything was definitely fine with the house. On that note, Gwen went to bed and advised her brother to go to bed too. However, the guy was not going to sleep, because the girl's reaction and the atmosphere in the apartment itself seemed strange to him, and he had to find out what was going on here, so he settled down on the sofa to keep an eye on this place all night. At first it was quiet, but after some time the guy heard the sounds of dripping water. When he opened his eyes, he couldn't understand when he had fallen asleep and who had covered him with a blanket. The sounds also confused him, because his sister always shut off the water tightly after taking a bath. Looking closer, Ethan saw a man standing at the other end of the room. He grinned and made strange sounds, and the guy couldn't understand who it was. Terrified to death, he began to slowly approach the person, still not understanding who was in front of him. Perhaps it was Gwen. And then the man turned around, his black and red eyes looking straight at Ethan. The creature approached the guy, whispering something under its breath. And then the young man realized that he was dealing with a ghost. Now it was clear why the price for the house was so low. The spirit stated that this was his home, and Ethan was not welcome here. But he did not come closer to the young man. He must not have been hostile. A shadow swirled beneath Ethan, and the ghost was clearly frightened by it. When the guy turned on the light, there was no one in front of him. However, the night ended, and a new school day began on the Tenshi Palace campus. The first thing Gwen did was rush to tell Ethan that last night a ghost had pretended to be her brother and was wandering around her door, and she almost opened it for him. Ethan also told her that he had met a ghost, and then they came to the conclusion that they needed to move out of this apartment immediately. But the guy decided not to rush, because they were told that it was normal to be afraid of ghosts at first, and the spirits themselves did not seem all that hostile. Suddenly, someone's dark strands fell across the young man's face. Turning around, he saw in front of him a long-haired girl in shorts and a long red coat. It was the same student who smelled Ethan yesterday at the training ground. Valerie, she said that she lives in apartment 1703 and could help get rid of the ghost in their home. Coming closer to the guy, she also added that he could just come in if he wanted. However, Gwen quickly interrupted their sweet conversation, saying that she herself had 12 skill holes, so they did not need outside help. Realizing she wasn't particularly welcome, Valerie turned around and said that in that case they would have to deal with the ghosts themselves. Just as she was about to leave the office, Marcus walked in, not expecting to see Valerie there at all. Seeing that the students were slacking off, he hastened to send them out for a run, since future spirit masters must also be well prepared physically. And then Ethan decided to ask if it was true that there were no ghosts in Tenshi's palace. Marcus was a little annoyed by this question, since the palace had been passed down through generations for thousands of years, and its protective formation was invulnerable to any evil spirits. But Ethan was also interested in why they had to rent an apartment outside if the palace was so big. Here Marcus could not resist shouting that the palace's protective formation was created from the original souls of 5 primeval ghosts, but he immediately realized that he had said too much. But Ethan was very happy to hear something about primordial ghosts and primordial souls. But the teacher abruptly cut the conversation off, saying that it would be better for him to concentrate on training and not bother his head with unnecessary things, and then wished him and his sister good luck and left. Left alone, Ethan began to think that Tenshi's palace was indeed full of secrets, and the further he went, the more interesting they became. He decided to put his thoughts together on paper for a bit, and then his sister came up to him, and then Ethan asked her if she had received the pearl of the hanged ghost that Marcus had promised to give her. Gwen said that when she reached the first level, she would be given her parents' legacy, and when she reached the second level, she would be given a pearl. Overall, Ethan agreed with this state of affairs, but he was still worried that there were many powerful masters in Skynet who would not allow any supernatural phenomena to occur here. And yet no one has resolved the problem with apartment 1701. But Ethan was determined to find out for himself that evening. Meanwhile, the dark-haired ghost girl was writing on the walls and floor of her room, continuing to repeat one phrase, "Get out of the house." When midnight struck, Ethan knew the time had come. The ghost was here. A pale, dark-haired girl in a white dress moved awkwardly through the house, heading towards the guy's room, obviously trying to pretend to be Gwen. She walked carefully to the door and called Ethan. The young man opened the door for her and pretended to believe that she was his real sister. He asked if she wanted to eat, to which the ghostly girl answered no. The spirit was confused. Did he not understand that she was not his sister? Why was he not afraid? Suddenly the door opened again, and Ethan asked why the girl was still there. He took her hand and led her to the kitchen, still intending to feed her. The ghost didn't understand. She was angry about this situation. Was this guy really playing with her? A black aura swirled around the girl. Her eyes turned red, and she screamed at Ethan to get out of her house. But Ethan just smiled as if he wasn't at all surprised that the girl wasn't Gwen, and still offered her something to eat. This attitude made the ghost angry. She didn't know what to say. Suddenly, her essence evaporated and flew away, no longer wanting to take part in this performance. Ethan was surprised. This ghost girl did not attack him. What could have happened to her that she became like this? When morning came, the boy was awakened by Gwen's scream, and he immediately ran to her. But as soon as he opened the door, women's underwear flew at him. Gwen was extremely outraged. How could her brother keep so much lingerie under the bed? And most importantly, why? The girl left the room, and Ethan saw a whole box of red underwear. Was this really the work of that ghost girl to take revenge on him? But there was something else here. At the bottom of the box, Ethan saw a framed photograph of 2 girls. There were 2 names written at the bottom. Zoe, obviously she was the ghost, and another one, Gloria. There was also a phone number next to it, and Ethan decided that he should call it. The girl with purple hair, the one in the photo, was sitting at her desk in the office when suddenly her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar to her, so she decided not to answer. Then she received a message from Ethan, saying that he had met Zoe and wanted to talk about it. Gloria was shocked. She didn't understand what was happening, but the guy explained to her that he encountered Zoe's ghost in apartment 1701 and wanted to know what happened to her. The woman was horrified. She couldn't believe that Zoe's ghost had actually taken up residence in this apartment, and then she decided to video call Ethan. She said that if he really wasn't joking, he could try to help Zoe find peace, and then she would give him a red tear soul pearl later. And even though Ethan wanted to get his hands on the pearl, he really wanted to resolve the situation with Zoe. He needed to know if she was killed and if her death was connected to Tenshi's palace. He showed Gloria a photo of her and Zoe together. Seeing him, the woman could not hold back her tears. She wanted the girl to be free after all these years. She said that when Zoe was a student at Tenshi Palace, she was full of hope for the future. But people from all over the world came to the palace, and soon she was noticed by some rich students, and one day they abused her. Zoe didn't want to be humiliated, so she exposed them online, and soon everyone knew about the situation. Certainly the villains were punished, but the most extreme measure in Tenshi's palace was simple expulsion. But Zoe herself gained nothing from this situation. On the contrary, her offenders had much more power outside the palace. In the end, they killed Zoe, and then she became a wandering ghost, and Tenshi's palace did not comment on the situation. Gloria said that even as the head of the association, she was unable to help the girl find peace. So if Ethan really wanted to help her, he had to try really hard and not get into anything terrible himself. At this point, their conversation ended, and the shadow sent Ethan another message, saying that people were afraid of ghosts, and ghosts knew that people were poisonous. The wickedness of a man's heart is more terrible than anyone else's. But this had nothing to do with Ethan, because he would choose the easiest way to kill Zoe's ghost and let her rest in exchange for the red soul pearl. Ethan knew he could easily deal with this spirit. However, he didn't understand why everyone thought that death was the only way to put her to rest, because if he chose that way, how would he be any different from the loser he was in his past life? He decided that he would use his power and his methods to allow Zoe to find true peace. Sometime later, Ethan went for a night walk around the bus station, and meanwhile, the supernatural phenomena in Skynet City were getting worse every day, and now Tenshi's palace decided to intervene. In order to uncover supernatural incidents and enhance students' practical experience in dealing with ghosts, various tasks were assigned daily. Finally, Ethan came to the destination of one of them. It was Bus 444, and it was haunted. Inside, people seemed to be whispering and ghosts were crying. Everything indicated that he had come. Ethan knew it too, and at that moment he felt someone approach him from behind. It was a fair-haired young man. He put his shield forward, not understanding what this boy was doing here. Ethan waved at him in a friendly manner, saying that apparently they both had a mission on Bus 444, to which the young man grinned unkindly, probably thinking that he was an ordinary first-year student. Ethan said that there is a green-level ghost here, and if you deal with it, you can get a green pearl. The young man approached him and demanded that he follow his instructions without question, and Ethan readily agreed. The guy said that he was a second-level spirit master, so he would take care of him if anything happened. In reality, he was thinking that if there was danger, he would simply use the blue-haired boy as cannon fodder. The young man introduced himself as Neil, stating that if Ethan was truly a sophomore, he should know what that name meant. And Ethan knew exactly what it meant. The boys got on the bus, and the young man paid the fare, saying that he only had a large bill left. The driver replied that he would change the money for him, and then otherworldly money began to fall from the roof. Ethan caught one of them on his finger and thanked the driver. But Neil was shocked by his calmness, because he himself was already ready to summon a spiritual weapon. Suddenly, the man heard sounds outside the bus and decided to look out the window. A ghostly woman entered the neighboring bus, and the entire vehicle was literally surrounded by spirits. Neil ran up to Ethan, horrified, telling him that there was another 444 bus parked nearby, and that it was just full of ghosts. But the boy didn't understand. Was the older man seeing double? However, Neil knew he had to get off at the next stop and destroy the machine directly. Meanwhile, the bus started moving and traveled some distance. Neil told the driver to slow down as he was about to get out. But as soon as the transport stopped, ghosts immediately rushed through the open doors. They blocked Neil's path, whispering something of their own. The spirits surrounded the guy, and he had no way to get off the bus, and the driver had already closed the doors. In a moment, the entire bus was filled with ghosts. They surrounded Neil, who was barely holding back screams of horror. The young man was angry. He couldn't get out of here. It was getting more and more dangerous inside. But this blue-haired boy didn't even bat an eyelid. Meanwhile, a spirit that was constantly scratching itself sat down next to Ethan, and the guy, citing some kind of allergy, asked the otherworldly passenger to sit with his blonde friend. The ghost obediently stood up and headed towards Neil, who was perplexed. Could this boy really communicate with them? Soon, Neil was surrounded on all sides by all sorts of ghosts. Ethan's shadow had a message for him again, telling him that his special friend would be getting off at the next stop, which meant he had one last chance. Suddenly, the bus ran out of fuel, and the driver got out to refuel. Panic broke out inside the cabin. The ghosts screamed and cried, not understanding why they had stopped in place. Neil was on the verge of hysteria. He couldn't understand how this task could only have a green level, because it was definitely worth a red one. Ethan also realized that Tenshi Palace had completely underestimated the seriousness of Bus 444, and it seemed that the real ghost here was the driver. Neil knew he had no choice but to use his slow-witted partner to get out of here, so he offered to kill the ghosts together and get outside. Ethan agreed, grinning slyly at the older man. With one movement, the boy summoned his spiritual weapon, and the ghosts immediately rushed towards him. The blonde thought that this boy was definitely very stupid, since he decided to use a weapon while standing in a crowd of spirits, and tried to quietly get off the bus himself. However, his path was blocked by other ghosts. He knew that he needed to immediately release his skill, Blood Rush, which was hiding his energy, and then quickly escape. He only had 10 seconds and he had to get out of here while that idiot distracted the ghosts. But then suddenly a flash of light flew at his back. Ethan soon emerged from the fog, and Neil was incredibly annoyed. How dare this brat attack him? And then Ethan decided to ask him if he remembered who Zoe was. Neil remembered that this was the girl who got him banned from Tenshi's palace for 2 years. He realized that the boy had come for revenge, but he was not going to give up so easily. The blonde rushed at the young man, swinging his shield with all his might. But at the moment of impact, Ethan quickly pulled the ghost standing behind him by the collar and blocked himself from the shield with it. The next moment, the guy pulled out his dagger and was about to hit Neil, but he had a special skill, bronze skin. Ethan knew that with such meager skills, he would never defeat the bronze ghost, and he simply bought this soul pearl. Rich people's children believe that money can buy everything, even human life, and these thoughts made the boy very angry, so he pushed Neil back onto the bus with all his strength. The blonde didn't understand why this guy's strength was so variable, but Ethan advised him not to waste time on unnecessary thoughts, because his skill would soon expire, and it was unknown whether Neil would be able to live until then. The young man knew he would have to use his bronze skin to hold off the creatures, but it was unlikely to help him much. Then Neil howled, begging Ethan to help him, promising him anything in exchange for saving him. But Zoe also begged him for mercy, didn't she? But Neil didn't care about the girl. She didn't bother him at all. He thought that her death meant nothing. And in response to this, Ethan kicked the bastard away. The ghosts were already 2 steps away from the blonde, and he continued to beg the guy to save him. He said that he would give him any red-level soul pearl. The offer was tempting, so Ethan asked Neil to come closer to him. Hope appeared in the young man's eyes, and he crawled towards his savior, barely escaping the clutches of the ghosts. However, Ethan, instead of saving the guy, only told him that every deed has a price, and this was his price, and then he closed the doors of the bus. At that moment, the ghosts rushed at Neil, tearing him apart. When it was all over, the only thing Ethan regretted was that he hadn't heard the bastard's screams. At that moment, a spirit came up to him from behind and asked him what it was like to kill one of his own kind. The guy was about to swing his blade to hit the ghost, but it intercepted his hand. And when Ethan turned around, he saw that it was the driver. He was curious because people kill ghosts because they harm them, but why do they kill the same people? To which Ethan replied that he just kills those he doesn't like. The driver found it interesting and said he hadn't experienced such a special feeling for a long time. He turned to the boy, saying that he would like to take him with him on the road, but Ethan did not want to end his life so early. The guy looked at the spirit and understood that this driver was on a completely different level than those white ghosts on the bus. He swung at the spirit, but it easily dodged the blow. The driver realized that there was no way to get the boy back into the ghost territory, and then asked if he still had the money he had given him. Realizing that they remained, the spirit asked Ethan to keep them safe, and then vanished. Sometime later, Ethan returned to the apartment. Neil was dead. He understood that there were still 6 left. The next day, classes continued, and Marcus announced that the test on Bus 444 was now at the red level, and also that 4 ghosts had appeared in the neighboring town and had already killed 7 girls. At that moment, a message came on Ethan's phone. It was Gloria, who had already seen the news of Neil's death and asked what pearl Ethan would like as a reward. She was very straightforward, so the guy also decided not to be shy and asked for 1 bronze-level pearl and 1 hang ghost pearl. However, Marcus had one more important announcement, this one concerning all first-level spirit lords. As it turned out, Tenshi Palace allowed first-year students to choose a white-tier soul pearl of their choice. Ethan walked between the shelves with pearls and chose the one that would suit him, and finally found it. It was the pearl of the soul of the black ghost. It gave the skill, Black Light. It increased the destructive power against ghosts. The shadow told Ethan that if she absorbed 1 red-tier soul pearl, his spiritual weapon would gain a new skill. However, to unlock the 5th skill slot, a fatal grade pearl was needed, and for the 6th, a catastrophic grade pearl was required. But it was too early to think about that, so Ethan simply inserted the white pearl into his dagger. She was successfully absorbed, and a moment later she expanded 3 more advanced chains. They allowed for increased defense and range of the black light and also provided the ability to weaken the enemy. Ethan was pulled out of his thoughts by Gwen, who ran up to him, asking about which pearl he had chosen. The girl confided that Marcus had secretly given her the soul pearl of the miasma ghost, whose ability forms the shackle skill. Ethan was seriously surprised because this pearl was a green level, a level higher than those given to the others. Gwen asked him to keep it a secret and said that Marcus was waiting for her and her brother could keep her company. When they came out into the yard, the man was already there. Valerie was standing behind him, and two more guys were standing to the side. He explained that according to the tradition of the Tenshi Palace, after selecting the soul pearl, the students must form a team of 5 spiritual masters. But Gwen didn't like this idea. She just wanted to be with her brother. Then Valerie intervened in the conversation and suggested that Ethan join forces. Gwen didn't like this state of affairs either. She grabbed her brother, not wanting to let him go with this girl. They were interrupted by Marcus, who said that although they were free to team up with whomever they wanted, the teachers still hoped that the best students would form one team. He had 2 other people as an example, Henry and Chad. They both had 8 skill holes, their grades were top-notch, and they were also from wealthy families. So in the future, the whole team could have red-level gems. However, Ethan was not happy with this development of events. He took his sister's choice seriously, and these guys themselves looked strange. Leaving Gwen with them would have been simply dangerous. Henry and Chad were not at all happy to be spoken about in that way. In anger, Chad pulled back his bowstring and released an arrow, engulfed in a blue aura. But Ethan noticed her in time and immediately rushed to Gwen, covering her with his body. He deflected the arrow, flying at them with his dagger. At that moment, Henry appeared behind them, swinging his hammer towards the guy, preparing to strike. However, Ethan didn't lose his composure. He carefully pushed his sister away from him and kicked away the guy's attack, knocking the weapon out of his hands. When the brawl was over, the young man approached his angry classmates, preparing to take proper revenge on them for such an outburst. But by that time, Marcus had already arrived and said that fighting in the group was prohibited, to which Ethan suggested organizing a fair competition between him and the guys. They themselves were not against it either. Chad suggested organizing a competition between teams of spirit lords. Ethan was only too happy to meet them in combat, but told them not to blame themselves if they suddenly got seriously injured. Soon all the students participating in the battle were already in the arena, and their classmates came to see who would win. However, Ethan's team only consisted of 3 people, himself, Gwen, and Valerie, which became another source of ridicule for Henry. But Ethan was confident that he alone would be enough to deal with these 5 scoundrels. However, according to the rules, the team actually had to consist of exactly 5 people. The guy turned around and looked at the girls sitting in the seats behind him. It was Sally and Esther, his new acquaintance. In one movement, they descended into the arena, joining the team, and then the competition was officially open. The girls summoned their spiritual weapons. Sally was going to be the team's medic, and Esther was going to be the scout. But Ethan stopped them, saying that there was no need for that, and he would like to go on alone. This arrogance really angered Harry's team, and the boys immediately rushed at him, their weapons ready. However, Ethan flew through them with one sharp movement, parrying their blows and knocking the weapons out of their hands, and the guys didn't even have time to understand what happened. One of them swung an axe towards the young man, but he easily kicked him away. Next was Genie. As soon as he flew up to Ethan with his axe, he hit him in the stomach with his elbow, and he fell. The next moment, the boy summoned his dagger and released green energy straight at the enemy, forcing him to crawl away from the battle. They had to do something or they would lose, and that's when Chad stepped in, drawing 4 arrows at once, ready to block his opponent's moves. At this time, Ethan was fighting with the rest of the guys, and only a moment before the arrows hit him, he noticed them. But the guy didn't lose his composure. He deftly jumped to the side, exposing his opponents to attack. So it turned out that the boys beat themselves up. But Henry didn't want to give up either. He ordered his guys to pin Ethan down from all sides so that he had nowhere to hide. Gwen watched in horror as her brother fought against 5 people at once and was ready to intervene in the fight. However, Valerie stopped her because Ethan said that he could handle it himself and the girls could only trust him. When the young man hesitated for a second, Henry immediately flew towards him with an axe, using a green-level skill. Ethan responded by using his skill, and the boys, turning into 2 energy balls, collided with each other. A moment later, a powerful explosion rocked the arena. Because of the smoke, it was unclear who ultimately won. But as soon as it dissipated, everyone saw that Ethan was standing without a single scratch, proudly towering over the defeated Henry. However, as it turned out, the battle was not over yet, and Chad rushed to the guy, telling him not to forget about him. A moment later, the arena was enveloped in a huge dome of mist, that very skill of Ethan's. Chad stood there, surrounded by impenetrable clouds, urging the boy to finally become a man and fight a fair fight. But before he could finish speaking, Ethan was behind him, holding a dagger to his throat. When the smoke cleared, all 5 of Henry's team were down. However, Ethan found this fight quite boring. Marcus couldn't believe his eyes. Could it really be that the same guy he considered insignificant actually single-handedly defeated 5 strong students? At that moment, a man with long dark hair and gray clothes approached him and asked which class the boy was in. Marcus hurried to greet the man, for it was none other than Master Isaac, the chief spiritual master of the Tenchi Palace, with a 3-star mark on his clothes signifying that he had defeated 3 ancient-level ghosts. Isaac said that a ghost had recently appeared in Skynet and he had returned to deal with it, and then he pointed to the blue-haired boy, asking who he was. Marcus explained that this was William's adopted son, who had entered the school this year. The master couldn't believe it was Ethan. He had grown up so quickly. Soon the young man himself noticed the man standing next to his teacher. In just a moment, Isaac was right in front of Ethan, causing him to stagger in surprise. He introduced himself by name, saying that he was an old friend of his father. He also stated that William knew the secret of the boy's life, and Ethan was taken aback by these words. He did not understand what secret they were talking about. Isaac offered the boy a duel, in which all he had to do was touch the master's clothes, and then he would tell him about this secret, and Ethan had no choice but to agree because he knew too little about the owner of the body, and this information would be extremely useful to him. Ethan knew that the man was very strong, and even if he used one hand, he might not be able to defeat him. But the task was very easy. Just touch the clothes, and then the guy rushed forward, stretching out his hand to the man's robe. However, his finger seemed to stop a millimeter from the fabric. A moment later, the man waved his hand, and Ethan was immediately thrown back onto the floor. He felt how powerful Isaac's spiritual power was, and realized that a blow to the forehead wouldn't work here. He had to find another way. Then the guy again summoned clouds of fog, as he had done before, and decided to attack the master from behind. But Isaac foresaw this too, and with one light blow of his hand, he repelled the young man's attack. Having managed to land on his feet, Ethan found himself right behind the man, and he realized that now was his chance to win, and immediately reached his fingers towards the master's clothes. But before he could touch her, Isaac grabbed his hand, saying that he was disappointed with the meager skills of his son William. Ethan didn't understand why this man was so strong. He couldn't free himself from his grip. The next moment, the master threw the guy back with force, causing him to fall to the floor with a crash. Gwen was terrified. She was afraid that something had happened to her brother. She immediately ran to him, trying to bring him to consciousness, but the young man did not react in any way. Master Isaac approached them. He wanted to examine Ethan, and although this man scared the girl to death, she allowed him to check her brother. The man touched his pulse with his fingers, and then he realized the guy was conscious. The next moment, Ethan jumped up and reached out to Isaac's face. He wanted to see his true face under the mask. However, before he could even touch the man, he had already disappeared without a trace. He was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had evaporated. Could he really teleport? Meanwhile, the master was already standing on the roof of the arena, watching Ethan from above. This was the first time someone had forced him to use his abilities in this way, because it was difficult to predict this guy's thoughts. Marcus came to the boy's aid and told Ethan not to try such tricks on Isaac again, but the master had a good heart, so he would get away with it this time. And yet initially, everyone gathered here for a duel that had already ended, and the winner was Ethan's team of spirit masters. Marcus advised the boys to train more, and the boy hastened to assure him that before going to the ghost town of Song, they would hone their teamwork to perfection. That evening, lying in his bed, Ethan thought about how powerful the Tenchi Palace eyes were, and how in the future he might face the same hopeless situation as today. He understood that if he wanted to avenge Zoe, he needed to become stronger. Suddenly, a bracelet appeared on his fingers out of nowhere. Looking back, the guy saw Isaac standing at his window, and he was taken aback. How could he get in here? And why was he giving him this bracelet? The man replied that in that test, people usually thought about how to touch his clothes. But Ethan wanted to knock off the mask. His thinking was different from other people, and the man admitted that he had high hopes for him. He said that his father, William, was a hero. One day he read his diary. He sacrificed his life to seal the ghost of Feng Meng and save the entire city from destruction. His dying wish was to return home, even if only for a moment. So Isaac hoped that by visiting that ghost town of Fengmen, Ethan could fulfill his father's wish. Ethan immediately realized that he would go to the city no matter what, and then the master asked him to put on the bracelet that he gave him. And the guy thought that even though he did not know everything, he could use this chance to get into the depths of the ghost city. When Ethan put on the bracelet, he asked what it was for, but the master replied that he didn't need to know some things, and also added that he would stay in Skynet for 3 weeks. But the guy had to pack his things to go with him to the ghost city of Chang tomorrow. Ethan immediately rushed to his bag, because in the city of Sang, it would be much easier for him to get the desired soul pearls, and then it would be much easier for him to avenge Zoe when the time came. But Isaac stopped him, saying that before that they needed to go somewhere else, since the palace had ordered him to deal with a local ghost. The password of this spirit was Ghost Driver. Meanwhile, the ghosts were already gathering near that very bus number 444. The driver called them to take their seats quickly. But when he looked out the window a few moments later, he saw that the spirits had been torn apart by something, and he realized that the Tenshi Palace had sent the head of the Middle Palace, a level 8 spirit lord, who only had 3 skill openings after him, and yet he was able to suppress 3 ghosts. Isaac didn't expect the driver to end up in Skynet like this. Apparently, Tenshi's palace really is underestimated. Meanwhile, Ethan was watching from the bushes. Before coming here, the master mentioned 7 levels of ghosts: white, green, red, evil, calamity, disaster, and ancient. And without a doubt, this driver's aura revealed him to be a ghost of the ancient level. The ghost was already starting to lose patience. His eyes glowed green, and black marks appeared on his body. He screamed that there was no one in the world who could stop him. He taunted Isaac, claiming that in the future, spirits would rule this world, and drove his bus at full speed straight towards the man. However, the master jumped straight onto the roof of the bus with one easy movement, intending to correct the absurd thinking of this spirit. The next moment, the entire space under Isaac's feet turned into a pile of rubble, but the bus was no longer there. Ethan decided to back away a little to avoid being hit by the shockwave, and at that time he was trying to figure out what ability the ghost driver was using. The task of dealing with this ghost turned out to be a bit of a hassle for Isaac, so he raised his hand up and summoned a large bell. The instrument appeared above the man's head, surrounded by small portals from which sound waves were emanating. The master could hear even the slightest rustle of the grass. He concentrated. A moment later, the driver appeared above him, his body as if torn to pieces. And then Isaac realized that although the spirit could travel through time, if space was frozen, it would be forcibly expelled from it. As soon as the ghost was on the ground, the master extended his hand, charged with aura, towards him, forcing him to stop. But the driver became even more enraged. His clothes began to come apart at the seams, and Isaac was thrown back by the shock wave. The spirit reached the peak of the ancient and freed itself from its shackles. A moment later, a bus appeared out of nowhere and was rushing straight towards the man. However, the mechanic stopped the machine with one movement of his hand, tearing it in half. Meanwhile, the spirit disappeared. Did he really want to escape to Skynet again? Isaac rushed after him, leaving the bus ghosts on Ethan. And the guy himself still didn't understand what had happened. How could the bus end up in such a state in the blink of an eye? In fact, due to the time stop skill, Ethan's perception stopped even before the master used his ability. Suddenly, the illusion appeared before Isaac again, and he had to draw a rune to dispel it. But it was too late. The ghost driver's accomplice had already helped him escape. Ethan was in shock, because this was a real battle at the level of the ancients. And if not for the master, the boy would have been dead long ago. Meanwhile, Isaac left, saying that Ethan could also go home as soon as he dealt with the ghosts, and that tomorrow evening they would go to the city of Sang. But the boy was annoyed. He understood that he was still too weak. Before going to the ghost town, he had to become stronger. And time passed, and the next day Ethan saw a small box with red pearls on his desk. Gloria was truly amazing. She was able to get 2 red-level pearls so quickly, so now Ethan could improve his skills and confidently go to the ghost town. At that moment, the message appeared in front of him again. The shadow asked him to feed it the pearl of the hanged ghost, and then the guy would open another hole for the skill, as well as the shackles skill, and Ethan decided that this would be the best solution. The shadow swallowed the pearl, and the young man's body felt as if it were being pierced by a powerful charge of power. So this is what the red level pearl felt like. From the influx of power, all the glass surfaces in the room cracked, and the guy received the ability Shackles. He felt that his strength had increased significantly. Taking the dagger in his hands, Ethan saw that a new hole had appeared on it, meaning it was time to move on to the branch. Entering the mysterious space, the young man saw branches coming from the pearl and realized that he needed to refine the branch of the demon ghost soul pearl next. Thus, the power of the black pearl increased, and new branch skills were unlocked for Ethan. These were Iron Armor, Hellfire, and Gemini, all pretty good abilities. Now, even a second-level spiritual master was no match for Ethan. Coming out of the astral state, the guy approached the mirror in which Zoya's ghost was reflected. He said that her offenders would be sent to the city of Tsang for testing, and when the time comes, he will make them pay. Meanwhile, Ethan and Isaac arrived at the ghost town, which was originally an ancient tomb built hundreds of years ago, and the master also noted that he could only stay with the young man for 2 weeks, and how much he could grow would depend on his own efforts. Soon the young people came to the cave. There were a number of people around it. Many of them recognized the master. A large man approached Ethan, offering to take him to the ghost town. The guy became curious about how far they could take him, since he needed to meet an evil-level ghost. The man only smirked at the young man's arrogance. He would most likely run away in fear just upon seeing a spirit of such a level. Their conversation was interrupted by Isaac, who said that he hadn't met a ghost of such a weak level as the evil one for a long time. Following him, an adult man approached. It was Wilson, the 5th-ranked ghost lord and the head of the ghost city. He was happy to greet his leader. Soon everyone else joined in, bowing to the master and greeting him, to which Isaac himself said that he was there on personal business. Moving away from the crowd, the man and Ethan went down below. The master explained that there were 10 tombs in the city. The first ones were inhabited by ghosts of the white, green, and red levels, and further down there were more serious spirits. He explained that Ethan would now have to rely on his own strength to survive in the first 3 tombs for 2 weeks. In other words, in order to survive, the guy needed a power that would allow him to defeat red-level ghosts with his own hands. When the men entered the tomb, it was filled with luminous souls. Isaac handed the boy a spirit curse pass. It was imbued with incredible resentment and would help partially hide his scent from strangers. He said that grave and iron ghosts live here, and within 3 days, Ethan will need to kill 30 and 10 of each type, respectively. The guy remembered that in order to transform the black light skill into black armor, the iron ghost soul pearl was needed. Meanwhile, the spirits began to slowly creep up on the boy, and even though they were of the white level, if they gathered together, they became dangerous, and Isaac wanted the boy to cope without his help. But before Ethan could answer, a ghostly hand suddenly emerged from the ground and grabbed his leg. Several more ghosts followed her and immediately rushed at the guy, but he understood that this would clearly not be enough to defeat him. With one easy movement, he cut down the spirits with his daggers without receiving a single scratch, because after absorbing the soul pearl of the hanged ghost, his physical abilities became much stronger. But before he had time to come to his senses, another spirit appeared behind him, much larger than the previous ones. It was him, the Iron Ghost. Ethan reacted quickly, attacking the spirit from above. He wanted the pearl of his soul. As he struck, he felt how tough the creature's skin was. The guy heard strange sounds to his side. Turning around, he saw 2 more iron ghosts. They were rushing straight at him. If this continued, it would attract even more ghosts, so Ethan needed to deal with them quickly. As it turned out, only his strongest attack was effective against such armored creatures. However, the ghosts continued to advance. Dealing with a whole crowd of green-level spirits at once was not so easy. Luckily, the guy's strength had increased significantly recently. Otherwise, he would have had a hard time. But nevertheless, he had to try to deal with the ghosts one by one. Ethan used a fog curtain, and it disoriented the creatures a little. And the moment one of them revealed his weak points, the guy dealt a critical blow to him. A soul pearl flew out from the spirit. Ethan picked it up and also noted that if you rely on physical strength, you can save a lot of spiritual energy. He decided not to use the shackles for now. Even if it was a long battle, he could handle it himself. In the meantime, he decided to improve black light with a pearl. The skill was upgraded to black armor. His blade exuded a black aura. Ethan unlocked two new skills, ghost armor and spirit armor, and they looked amazing, but he was afraid that if he continued to improve, he would eventually become a monster. Meanwhile, the aura enveloped his body, creating an incredibly strong armor. It fit Ethan perfectly, and he was about to test its defense. The remaining two ghosts approached the guy and raised their hands to strike. However, for Ethan's armor, they were no more severe than a mosquito bite. The guy grinned through his mask. Had the ghost really become so weak compared to him? Then he grabbed both spirits, threw them in front of him, and in an instant flew through them, cutting them in half. Having received two more soul pearls, he decided that he had enough fighting for today. Sometime later, when Isaac and Ethan were sitting by the fire, the boy kept counting the pearls he had managed to collect. There were 26 of them. But the guy couldn't stop. He was very happy with his results. He decided to ask the master what level Feng Meng's ghost was, and he replied that it was black, and explained that when ghosts reach the ancient level, their intelligence could be the same as that of ordinary people. They could also create ghosts, and the black level ghost was more dangerous than the ancient level. Ethan was surprised because he thought that there were only 7 levels, and by that logic it turns out that there are ghosts more dangerous than the black level. Isaac replied that there were only 3 of them, but everything connected with them was strictly forbidden, even their names and their very essence. After all, the world was far from being as calm as Ethan saw it, so the master advised him to try to transfer to high school as soon as possible, and there Isaac would be able to tell him much more. Now it was time for the man to go, but he promised to send Ethan to the next tomb tomorrow. Meanwhile, 2 weeks passed. The guy continued to train hard. After breaking through to the 2nd level of Spirit Lord, his spiritual power was enough to maintain the shackles for 15 seconds. But with his current strength, he could barely kill the hanged ghost. His maximum was a ghost of almost red level. Isaac told him that he could now survive in the 3rd tomb alone, but before he left, he had one more thing to sort out. Ethan immediately perked up, thinking that they were about to take on a big job, but the master only led the guy along. He was going to show him the deepest part of the ghost town. Soon they came to the 7th tomb. The ghost of Tsang was here, right outside the door. Isaac asked the boy to be extremely careful, because this place was very dangerous. And Ethan felt how strong and dark the atmosphere was here. It would definitely affect his mind if he let it slide, because there was a ghost here that was much more powerful than that driver. Suddenly, the guy seemed to be pierced by strings of an ominous aura. Voices in his head told him, "Kill him! Kill him!" When he could no longer resist the force that was subduing his will, he grabbed the dagger and rushed at Isaac. But the master stopped Ethan with one deft movement, surprised at how easily the ghost of love had subjugated his mind, and realized that the boy needed to train harder. When the young man was already lying on the ground, the man called the bell. He knocked over Ethan's head in a certain rhythm. When the guy opened his eyes, he was already in some unknown place. It resembled Tenshi's palace. An unknown man stood in front of him, but he seemed not to notice the young man at all, and he could not understand what the hell was going on. And then a large adult man burst into the room. He shouted at the stranger, saying that he was the best student in the palace, and now he was engaged in research of ghosts. He was so angry. What was this guy thinking? But the stranger replied that after the death of his second mentor, he realized that human life has limitations, but he wanted to conquer death and become like a ghost, immortal. The man rushed at him, throwing all of the stranger's things around, shouting that the ghosts were already dead, and then ordered that all of his things be confiscated. The next memory Ethan saw was the stranger praying in front of the portrait of the deceased. That same large man, he swore that he, Tsang, would never repeat the same mistake again. He wanted to break through the boundaries of life and death and become an eternal being. He exclaimed that this was his path. Literally a moment later, the man turned around and, seeing Ethan, rushed at him, shouting that no one dared stop him. At that moment, the guy woke up. The bell was still circling above him, but he didn't understand what kind of dream it was. Isaac waited for him to wake up. He told him that the guy was influenced by the aura of a love ghost, and he suddenly lost his mind, but the man had already beheaded the spirit. He handed the young man his soul pearl and said that it was time for them to move on. Soon they came to a large temple. The doors in front of them swung open, allowing the men to enter the tomb. In this coffin was the ghost of Tsang, the same one that Ethan saw all the time in Tenshi's courtyard. Suddenly, a ghostly snake rushed out of the tomb at Isaac, but the man immediately stopped her, sealing her back. He sternly said that as long as Tenshi Palace existed, The ghost of Sang would not be able to leave this coffin. He placed a seal on it. It was supposed to last for 3 more years. But Ethan wondered why not just kill this ghost, since that way he would definitely not cause any danger to anyone. But Isaac said that the ghost song was special, and the boy would learn more about it once he entered the central branch. In total, the Tenshi Palace had 4 branches: southern, eastern, western, and northern. Every year, the palace holds a competition between the 4 branches, and only the students who win the competition are eligible to enter the central branch. And if Ethan can do that, he will know everything. At this point, the men were forced to say goodbye. Ethan said that he would stay here and wait for his sister and the others. Finally, the master recommended that he train even more in order to become a 3rd-level spirit master as soon as possible and enter the central branch ahead of schedule. As soon as Isaac left, the boy realized that all the other students would be here, and he needed to prepare for revenge. He took photographs of men from his pocket. They were Zoya's killers, who had still not answered for their actions. Meanwhile, the students, led by Marcus, were pitching tents in the middle of a forest clearing. 4 girls, Gwen, Sally, Valerie, and Esther, were approaching the camp. Ethan's sister calmed Sally, saying that there would be nothing scary in the first tomb, only iron ghosts. But the girl herself understood that she knew about him only thanks to her brother. The teachers had not said a word about these ghosts before, and if they now wanted to ask them about what awaited them next, they would not be able to answer, because the students were in a real wilderness. Esther said she didn't detect any negative energy nearby, so there are definitely no ghosts within a 10-meter radius. The girls were about to pitch their tents here when they realized that Valerie had disappeared. At that moment, a young man approached them. It was Carl, a 2nd-year student, a 2nd-level spirit master, one of Zoya's offenders. He was surprised to see several girls in such a place and offered to help them. Sally was about to agree, but Gwen stopped her, telling Carl that they could handle it themselves. Meanwhile, Carl was thinking. He asked his comrade to conduct an investigation, and it turned out that there were as many as 4 girls in this team, each of whom was beautiful, so the upcoming test promised to be very fun. The man did not give up, insisting that elders should help younger ones. At that moment, Ethan, who had suddenly appeared here, approached him. He chuckled at such a zealous desire to help the girls, but still gave Carl the go-ahead to help set up the tents. Gwen was confused why her brother hadn't responded to her messages for so long, to which Ethan suggested that they move away. He wanted to tell the girls something. The boy looked back at Carl with disbelief, because he had just posted the news on the school forum and didn't expect him to fall for the bait so soon. Having moved a sufficient distance away, Ethan said that tomorrow they should go to the 3rd tomb, because the quality of the pearls there is much better, and this will be an excellent chance to strengthen the entire team. He assured the girls that he had already studied the ghosts in advance and found no danger there, and moreover, they had a high school student as an assistant. Meanwhile, Valerie reached one of the tombs, a seal was placed on it, and she understood that she had to release the spirit. The creature pulled its hand out of the coffin, tearing off the seal. A moment later, the tomb flared with a green aura. The creature was free. It was the ghost of Sang. He insisted that meanness was truly above all things, that this was his path. He looked at the girl, wondering what the dynasty was like now and why she freed him, to which Valerie replied that it was 2020 now, and she was looking for someone like herself. The ghost realized that 500 years had already passed. He had long since cast off his human shell. He was sure that he was exactly the one the girl was looking for. But Valerie needed confirmation. She wanted the ghost to prove that he really could do whatever he wanted. And the spirit was ready to do this. He was going to personally get to know the current Tenshi Palace and prove to the girl by killing what she wanted to see. Meanwhile, Ethan's team and Carl went to explore the 3rd tomb. And a 2nd year warned them that the ghosts here were stronger than the ones they had already encountered, so they needed to be careful. At that very moment, as if out of nowhere, a ghost jumped out at Gwen. Ethan immediately rushed to her aid, pushing away the spirit, and his sister grabbed his hand, asking him not to go far from her anymore. Sally and Esther hugged Ethan from the other sides. They also wanted the boy to protect them. But Carl wasn't thrilled because his plan hadn't even begun yet, and the boy was already the center of female attention. Then he smiled tensely and asked Ethan to help him collect the soul pearls and let the girls stay here, and the young man agreed. After a while, they moved a decent distance away from the girls. Ethan said that here he met an iron ghost and suggested to the elder that they split up. But Carl had other plans. He needed to finish off this upstart, and then all the girls would be his. He grabbed the knife and jumped on Ethan from behind, intending to plunge the blade into his throat. However, the guy immediately turned around, intercepting the knife, and Carl couldn't believe his eyes. What happened to his hand? But everyone had their secrets, and Ethan wanted to hear Carl's secret about Zoe. The guy didn't understand, because Zoe had been dead for a long time, but Ethan wanted to hear words of admission of guilt from him. Carl didn't like this turn of events. He took out his spiritual weapon. How dare this brat threaten him? He claimed that Zoe had been too disobedient and had died because of it, and now he intended to show this insignificant first-level spirit master the difference in their strength. At that moment, Ethan was enveloped in a dark aura, and he donned the black armor again. While Carl stared at him, not believing his eyes, the young man ran up to him. The next moment, he slammed the villain's head into the ground. Soon the armor fell off, and he continued to beat the killer with his fists. When Carl could no longer even stand on his feet, he begged Ethan to spare him. He even promised to leave those girls from his team at his disposal for a while. For such an incredibly generous offer, he received another punch. Ethan was sure that a worthless person like him was not worthy of living in this world. Then Carl began to beg the guy for help. He begged him not to kill him. But Ethan wasn't going to get his hands dirty, because he had already found a suitable executioner for the guy. A moment later, the ghost jumped out of the ground and instantly rushed at Carl. It was a hanged ghost, squeezing the guy's throat with its long tongue, not allowing him to breathe. A few moments later, the creature swallowed Carl whole, smacking its lips contentedly. But the creature didn't have long to rejoice, because immediately after Zoe's offender was killed, Ethan pierced the ghost with his dagger. The second target of his revenge was eliminated. Soon the girls from his team ran out to him, excited to hear his cry for help. Gwen looked behind Ethan and saw the corpse of a hanged ghost. The girl was shocked. Had her brother really become so strong in these couple of weeks that he could easily kill even red-level ghosts? But Ethan didn't show it, instead asking how the other second years, Carl's comrades, were doing, to which his sister replied that they had tied them up and given them to a herd of grave ghosts. Taking the bag of pearls, the guy realized that it was time to return, and this supply should be enough for some time. Suddenly, the shadow again transmitted a message to Ethan. It said that the boy now does not even suspect the upcoming horror. What could this mean?